Ready to dive into the mysterious world of the Vikings? Today we will reveal 5 secret rituals that were so sacred and personal that outsiders were never allowed to see them. These rites not only reveal the deep faith and cultural characteristics of the fierce northern warriors, but also explain how they viewed life, death, and their gods. We will learn about them in simple terms so that everyone can understand what was hidden behind the doors of their homes and in the depths of their sanctuaries. The world of the Vikings, which we often imagine from films and TV series, is full of battles, longships, and conquests. However, behind this well-known side of their lives, there were deep spiritual practices and rituals that were an integral part of their everyday life. The Vikings were not just fearless warriors and skilled sailors, but also people with a rich, complex, and very unusual for outsiders culture, rooted in myths, beliefs, and traditions. Their lives were permeated with faith in powerful gods such as Odin, Thor, Freya, and in fate that cannot be avoided. Weird. These beliefs affected everything from the birth of a child to the death of a warrior, from the construction of a new home to the beginning of a long campaign. They did not build grand temples of stone like the Romans or Greeks. Their sanctuaries were often sacred groves, hills, springs, or simple wooden structures that could be destroyed after the ceremony to preserve their mystery and purity. Viking rituals were deeply personal and tribal, strengthening the community, connecting people with their ancestors and gods, and helping them cope with the challenges of harsh northern life. These rites were not for the eyes of strangers. They were part of the inner life of the Scandinavian peoples, their personal connection to the spirit world and the forces of nature. The appearance of an outsider at such a ritual would not only be unwelcome, but perhaps even dangerous. This could be perceived as a desecration, a threat, or an attempt to steal their sacred knowledge. Therefore, if a foreigner did find himself in a Viking village, he would most likely not be allowed to participate in or even observe such sacred acts. These were rituals for their own, for those who understood their meaning, revered the same gods, and shared the same values. In a time when the world was full of dangers and knowledge was passed on by word of mouth, preserving such secrets was a matter of cultural survival and preserving a unique identity. These rites helped the Vikings maintain order in their society, prepare for battle, mark important events, and maintain a connection with their roots and higher powers. Let's lift the veil of secrecy and see what these rituals were that remained hidden from the eyes of outsiders and shaped the soul of this amazing people. The Vikings, being a people living in harmony and sometimes in harsh confrontation with nature, deeply believed that the world around them was animated. Every tree, every stone, every body of water had its own spirit, its own power. Their beliefs were closely intertwined with the cycles of nature, with the changing seasons, with harvest and hunting. They believed in 9 worlds, connected by the world tree Yggdrasil, inhabited by gods, giants, elves, dwarves, and other creatures. This cosmic order was the basis of their understanding of the world and their place in it. Their religion was not dogmatic, like many others, but more flexible and adapted to their way of life, based on oral tradition and personal experiences. There is no evidence of strict religious texts or a single centralized church. Instead, their beliefs were transmitted through sagas, poems, tales, and rituals that were living embodiments of their spiritual world and were constantly updated over time. They did not have priests in the modern sense, but had figures such as the Godi, male priest, and Gudja, female priestess, who led the rites and maintained contact with the gods. Rituals played a huge role in the lives of the Vikings. Not only did they help them communicate with the gods and ancestors, but they also served as a powerful tool for strengthening social ties within the community. Shared rituals, feasts, and sacrifices brought people together, created a sense of belonging and common purpose, and strengthened hierarchy and mutual trust. In a society where survival often depended on cohesion and mutual support, these rituals played a key role in maintaining order and harmony. Rituals also helped the Vikings cope with fear and uncertainty. Facing the unknown, whether it was a storm on the high seas or a battle with a superior enemy, required great courage and faith in a higher power. The belief that the gods were benevolent and the ancestors were protective gave them strength and determination, helping them overcome any obstacles and move forward despite fear. Why were these rituals hidden from outsiders? There were several reasons, all of which were vital to the survival and prosperity of the Vikings. First, it was to protect the sacred. The Vikings believed that their rituals had magical powers that could be desecrated or stolen if they fell into the wrong hands. Revealing the secrets could weaken their connection with the gods or even bring curses upon the entire clan. It was a matter of spiritual security. Second, it was a strategic necessity. In a harsh world where clans and tribes fought each other, knowledge of the enemy's inner rituals could give them a huge advantage. For example, if an enemy knew how the Vikings blessed their ships, they could try to find a way to undo the blessing or impose their own curse, which would weaken the Viking fleet. Knowing how they divined or initiated warriors could reveal their weaknesses or future plans. Thirdly, it was part of their identity. These rituals were what made them Vikings, what distinguished them from other peoples, what strengthened their cultural unity. Keeping these secrets helped them preserve their unique culture and pass it on from generation to generation, preventing it from mixing with foreign customs. Fourthly, it was connected with a sense of belonging. Only those who were part of the clan, who were born and raised in this culture, could truly understand and accept the meaning of these profound rituals. An outsider, not knowing the full background and all the beliefs, could only distort or misinterpret what was happening. Finally, it is important to understand that information about many of these rituals comes to us from a variety of sources, including archaeological finds, burial remains, artifacts, ritual objects, Scandinavian sagas, which were often written long after the events and could be changed, embellished, or adapted to new realities, and the writings of Christian missionaries, who were naturally biased and often portrayed pagan rituals in a negative light in order to justify their eradication. Therefore, the details of some rituals may be incomplete or subject to different interpretations. However, even what we know gives us a deep insight into the rich and complex spiritual world of the Vikings, which was much more than just the image of stern warriors. They were deeply religious people whose lives were inextricably linked to their myths and rituals, and these secret rites were the heart of their cultural heritage. Let us now look at these 5 rituals in more detail, delving into their essence and meaning for the Vikings, and try to understand why each of them was so important and kept secret. The first was the initiation ritual of young warriors. For the Vikings, warfare was not just a profession, but a way of life, deeply rooted in their culture and worldview, permeating every aspect of their existence. Viking society was structured in such a way that the role of a warrior was one of the most honorable and vital. Becoming a warrior meant not only learning to wield a sword or an axe, skillfully using a shield and a spear, but also taking on the enormous responsibility of protecting the clan, ensuring its safety and prosperity. This included going through physical and spiritual tests, proving one's valor, fearlessness, loyalty, and ability to survive in the harshest conditions. In a world where life was short and harsh and danger lurked at every turn, be it enemy raids, wild animals, harsh nature, or disease, a strong, skilled, and reliable warrior was the pillar of the community, its main protector and source of glory. Therefore, the transition from youth to full-fledged warrior was one of the most important and carefully guarded rituals in the life of a young Scandinavian, comparable in significance to birth or death itself, and marking his final transition into adulthood. This rite was a strictly internal matter of the clan, and its details remained strictly classified from outsiders. Outsiders, especially potential enemies, were never allowed to participate in these tests, since they revealed the methods of training and preparation of warriors, their tactics, as well as the moral and physical qualities that were valued in future defenders, making them vulnerable. This was not just a tradition, but a vital necessity for the survival and prosperity of the entire race in a world full of threats. The essence of this ritual was a series of rigorous tests that were intended to test the physical endurance, courage, agility, as well as the young Vikings' ability to exercise self-control, discipline, and survive in extreme conditions. These tests could be very diverse and depended on the traditions of a particular clan, its geographical location, available resources, and the needs of the community, but their overall goal was always the same: to ensure that the young man was worthy of bearing arms and fighting alongside adult warriors without becoming a burden, but bringing maximum benefit to the community. One such test could be walking on ice or crossing stormy waters. A young man might be ordered to cross a frozen lake or river where the ice was thin and dangerous, risking falling through, or to swim across an icy river in the coldest time of year, perhaps even carrying some kind of load or in full gear. This required not only physical strength, the ability to swim in icy water and endurance, but also great courage, composure, and the ability to make decisions in a critical situation, and demonstrated his willingness to face death without flinching, which was a most valuable quality for a warrior, because in battle the lives of his comrades depended on him. In some cases, the test could be more symbolic, but no less important: hunting a dangerous beast alone. The young man was sent into the forest, often without food and minimal equipment, to hunt down and kill a wild boar, a ferocious bear, or a pack of wolves on his own, using only a primitive weapon, often of his own making, or simply a knife and spear. This tested his wilderness survival skills, his wits, his physical strength, his ability to navigate and make decisions under immediate threat, and his ability to provide food for himself and his clan, which was important for any man in their society and his future role as head of the family. Another test often mentioned in sagas and tales was the test of pain. A young warrior might be forced to endure intense pain without groaning, such as undergoing ritual scarring, symbolizing clan membership, enduring intense cold without shelter for a whole night, standing in the freezing cold or even in the snow, or standing under an icy waterfall, demonstrating his fortitude, steadfastness in the face of physical suffering, and ability to control his emotions and body. It was believed that only those who could control their body and spirit in pain could be a true warrior, not succumbing to fear and panic on the battlefield, which was critical for maintaining the unit's combat effectiveness and survival. An important part of the ritual was also training in stealth, observation, and cunning. Young warriors could be sent into unfamiliar forests or even enemy territory, forced to survive there for several days without food and minimal equipment, and then required to return and report every detail they saw and heard, including the location of trails, enemy camps, water sources, the number of enemy forces, etc. This developed their ability to observe, remember, camouflage, move stealthily, and navigate the terrain, qualities indispensable for scouts, saboteurs, and effective fighters. Sometimes the trials included moral dilemmas that tested loyalty to the clan, honesty, courage, and the ability to keep secrets. They might be asked to find and return stolen treasure, or track down a traitor, which required not only physical effort, but also strategic thinking, using cunning, stealth, and intelligence. Young warriors might be forced to spend nights in the burial mounds of their ancestors so that they could sense their presence and receive blessings, as well as prove their fearlessness in the face of death. After successfully passing all the tests, which could last from several days to several weeks or even months, depending on the complexity and significance of the rite, the young man was officially recognized as an adult and a full member of the community. He was given his first real weapon, such as a sword or an axe, which was often forged especially for him or passed down from his father or grandfather, symbolizing his new status, his responsibility, and his inseparable connection with the clan. He received the right to participate in military campaigns, sit in on tings, popular assemblies where important issues were discussed and decisions concerning the life of the entire clan were made, and make decisions concerning the life of the community, as well as to marry and start a family, becoming a full member of society. This ritual was not just a formality. It was a profound psychological and social transition that shaped the Viking's character, taught him to overcome fear, act decisively, be loyal to his clan, his comrades, and his gods. The details of these rites were strictly confidential, since knowledge of them could give an advantage to enemies by revealing secrets of warrior training and survival techniques, leaving them vulnerable to future attacks. It was a sacred tradition, designed to ensure the strength, cohesion, and survival of the clan in a merciless world where only the strongest could stand. The second was the wedding ritual of the Knots of Fate. A Viking wedding was much more than just the union of two hearts in love. It was a complex and carefully planned rite that bound not only two people together, but also their families, clans, and even their ancestors, creating new alliances and strengthening existing ones that were vital to the survival and prosperity of the entire society. In a harsh and dangerous world, where every member of the community was important and resources were limited, marriages were often arranged to strengthen alliances, provide heirs, expand the influence of the lineage, resolve long-standing disputes between clans, or gain access to valuable resources such as fertile land, vast herds of cattle, important trade routes, or access to the sea for expeditions. However, despite this practical side, the Vikings believed that marriage was also a sacred act, approved by the gods, especially Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, and battle, and Frigg, Odin's wife, the goddess of the hearth, marriage, and childbirth, who patronized the family and marital bonds, protecting them. Therefore, the wedding ceremony was very personal, and its most important parts were held away from prying eyes in order to preserve the purity and strength of the new union and its mystical component, protecting it from evil spirits and prying eyes. Strangers were never allowed to this secret act, since it included oaths, magical rituals, and ceremonies that were understandable only to the initiates and could be used by enemies to weaken or manipulate the family, knowing its internal connections and weak points, or to impose curses on the new family. One of the central, most sacred and hidden from outsiders elements of a Viking wedding was the ritual of the knitting of the knots of fate, or handfasting in the broader Germanic context, although it had its own unique nuances and deep meaning among the Vikings, reflecting their beliefs in fate. This rite was performed before selected elders of the clan, members of both families who were the most respected, wise, and authoritative, and perhaps also before a priest or priestess, Godi or Gdja. If one was present in the community and had sufficient authority to perform such an important rite, it symbolized the unbreakable bond between the bride and groom, as well as between their clans, creating a single entity from two separate clans, weaving their destinies together. During the ritual, the hands of the bride and groom were tied together using a specially prepared strip of cloth, braid, or thin leather belt. This band could be woven in advance, often embroidered with runes, symbols of protection, fertility, or good fortune. Or it could be made from a piece of clothing worn by ancestors to strengthen the connection with past generations and to secure their support and blessing. The binding of their hands symbolized the inseparability of their union, their shared responsibilities, their shared destiny, and that their lives and destinies were now intertwined forever, their paths joined in one unbreakable knot. This was the moment when they became one in the face of the gods and the clan, pledging loyalty and support to each other, promising to be together in joy and sorrow. In addition to the tying of hands, other equally important rituals could be performed that reinforced the sacredness and inviolability of marriage, filling it with magical power. For example, the exchange of personal heirlooms that were passed down from generation to generation and carried the spirit of the ancestors and the blessing of the family. These could be jewelry, small amulets symbolizing protection, strength, or luck, or even locks of hair that were exchanged between the bride and groom as a symbol of their fidelity and common history. They're merging into a new family unit with common protection. A ritual of common blood could also be performed, when the bride and groom might cut their palms and mix a few drops of blood in a bowl or on a sacred stone, symbolizing becoming blood relatives and the unbreakable bond between them, creating a new sacred blood union that was considered the strongest. Often, as a blessing, newlyweds were presented with rings, which could be not just jewelry, but symbols of an oath and a pledge of fidelity worn throughout their lives. These rings, often forged from silver or bronze, could bear special runes inscribed for the protection and well-being of the new family, or depict symbols of fertility. An important element was also the drinking of a common drink, often mead or ale, from a single horn or cup, which symbolized the unity of their souls, their common destiny and readiness to share all the joys and sorrows, all the trials and victories that life would bring them, confirming their oath. Sometimes the bride could bring her father's sword as a gift, symbolizing the transfer of protection of the family to the groom, and the groom could give her the keys to the house as a symbol of her power over the household. The entire ceremony was aimed at enlisting the support of the gods and ancestors. The newlyweds might make sacrifices to fertility gods such as Freya and Njörður, asking them for a rich harvest, numerous offspring, strength and prosperity, and peace and harmony in the family. Ancestors might also be called upon to bless the new union, provide it with support from beyond the grave, and protect it from evil forces and ill wishers who might envy their happiness. This ritual was not just a formality, but a profound spiritual experience that imposed serious obligations on the newlyweds to their lineage, the gods, and to each other, forming the basis for their life together and future generations. It strengthened social bonds, ensured the continuation of the family line, and served as a guarantee of stability within the clan, as new marriages created strong alliances and expanded the support network. The details of these rites were strictly confidential, as revealing them could weaken family ties or even jeopardize the magical protection they provided, or attract those who would want to destroy their union. It was a sacred tradition, intended only for the initiated, ensuring the prosperity and well-being of each specific lineage and the entire Viking society as a whole, its continuation and strengthening for many years to come. The third was the ritual of divination and fortune-telling, hidden runes and prophecies. For the Vikings, whose lives were full of uncertainty, danger and unpredictability, knowledge of the future, or at least its vague outlines, was of great importance. They constantly faced risks in sea voyages, where storms or enemies could await, on battlefields, where each fight could be the last, in the struggle with harsh nature, which could destroy crops or freeze entire settlements, and wild animals, as well as in everyday life, depending on the harvest, successful hunting and trade. Therefore, the need for predictions, advice from the gods and understanding of one's own destiny, was one of the most important spiritual practices that allowed them to feel more confident in a world full of chaos. They believed that each person's fate, or was already determined, but they also believed that the gods could provide signs that would help them better prepare for upcoming events, or choose the most favorable path, softening the blows of fate, or using its opportunities to achieve success. Having this knowledge gave them confidence, allowing them to make more informed decisions, plan their actions and cope with inevitable difficulties, reducing their fear of the unknown and giving them a sense of control. Divination rituals were strictly an internal matter, and their secrets were carefully guarded. Outsiders were never allowed to participate in them, as these practices could reveal the clan's weaknesses, their plans, as well as their deep beliefs and symbolism, which could not be trusted to outsiders, lest they give information to an enemy to use against them, for example, to attack at a vulnerable moment, or to cast magical curses. One of the most important and most hidden rituals from prying eyes was fortune-telling with runes. Runes were not just letters of the alphabet. For the Vikings, they were powerful magical symbols, bearers of ancient wisdom connected with the gods, especially with Odin, who, according to legend, learned the runes himself by nailing himself to the world tree, Yggdrasil, sacrificing himself for the sake of higher knowledge. Each runic symbol had a deep, multifaceted meaning that could only be interpreted by those who were initiated into the secrets of the runes and possessed sufficient wisdom, experience, and intuition. Usually these were women, prophetesses or vulvas, Scandinavian shamans, who had a special gift to see the future and communicate with the spirit world, sometimes falling into a trance state after lengthy preparations. These women were highly respected in society and often acted as advisors to earls and kings. Their words carried great weight and could influence important decisions. For divination, small wooden or bone slabs were used on which runes were carved or burned, often with the addition of blood, for example from an animal, to give them additional power and a connection with the living. These tablets could be kept in a special bag made of leather or linen, which itself could be consecrated. The fortune teller could throw the runes onto the cloth or the ground and then interpret their placement and the symbols that fell out, analyzing their relationship, paying attention to the position of the runes, upright or inverted, which could change their meaning and give additional nuances to the prediction, as well as taking into account the context of the question asked. In addition to rune divination, there were other methods of divination that were used depending on the situation and the availability of means, as well as the specialization of the soothsayer. For example, the interpretation of dreams, which were considered messages from the gods or ancestors, indicating future events or warning of dangers. Volvae could help in interpreting complex and confusing dreams, revealing their hidden meaning and offering recommendations for further action. Fortune-telling by the entrails of animals sacrificed was also practiced. Experienced diviners could read signs in the liver, heart, or other organs of the sacrificial animal, seeing them as omens of good or bad luck, a favorable or unfavorable outcome of a battle or campaign, which was especially important before major military undertakings or long journeys. Another method was to observe natural phenomena, such as the flight of birds, especially Odin's ravens or Freya's falcons, the movement of clouds, the direction of the wind, the behavior of animals, or even sounds coming from the forest or the sea. These phenomena could be perceived as signs from the gods, indicating their will or upcoming events, and required the diviner to have a keen understanding of the natural world and its connection with the spirit world. The seers could also use a trance, entering a special state, to communicate with the spirits of ancestors or gods, and receive answers to important questions about the future of the clan or the fate of individuals. Sometimes special herbs or mushrooms with psychotropic properties were used for this purpose, which helped to achieve this state. Another method could be throwing stones or other small objects on the ground and interpreting their location, or observing water, its ripples or color. These rituals were performed in solitude, often in special places, sacred groves, burial mounds, springs, or specially designated rooms, where the atmosphere was filled with mystery and reverence for higher powers, so as not to disturb the spirits and ensure the purity of the ritual. The atmosphere was filled with silence and concentration, so that nothing distracted from contact with the spirit world. The results of fortune-telling could influence important decisions. Whether to launch a raid, when to set off on a long voyage, how to build a new fortress, how to avoid illness, or what to do in case of a conflict with a neighboring tribe. The information gained from these rituals was extremely valuable and strategic for the survival of the clan, so outsiders could not witness such rites. Knowledge of the Vikings' inner prognoses and fears could give enemies a huge advantage, allowing them to strike at their weak points or anticipate the Vikings' actions, which could lead to disaster. It was a deeply personal and sacred practice that served as a support for the entire Viking society, helping them navigate a world full of danger and uncertainty, and maintaining a connection to their myths and beliefs, giving them a sense of control over their destiny and contributing to their prosperity. The fourth was the blessing of the Drakkar ritual, the consecration of the ship. The Drakkar, or longship, was much more than just a means of transportation for the Vikings. It was the heart of their civilization, a symbol of their power, their spirit of adventure, and their inseparable connection with the sea, which gave them freedom, the opportunity to explore new lands, to trade, and of course, to conquer. The ship was not only an instrument of trade, exploration, and conquest, but also a floating home, a hope for survival on the open ocean, a place where they spent much of their lives away from home, on the waves of the unforgiving sea. It was believed that each ship had its own soul, its own character, and the fate of the crew, its luck in the campaign, success in battle, and safe return home depended on its favor. Therefore, the launch of a new Drakkar or preparation for a long and dangerous sea voyage were among the most important and carefully guarded rituals in the life of the Vikings. Their kind of baptism or initiation of the ship. This ritual was intended to ensure protection, speed, unsinkability, and good luck in sailing, and its details remained strictly secret from outsiders. Outsiders were never allowed to these ceremonies, as they concerned the magical protection of the ship and its crew, which could be used by enemies to weaken or even destroy the vessel, depriving the Vikings of their main advantage and the basis of their power. The central part of the ritual was the consecration of the ship, aimed at invoking the favor of the sea gods and protection from the dangers of the water, such as storms, underwater reefs, enemy ambushes, as well as bringing good luck on the voyage and rich booty if it was a question of raids. One of the most colorful and, at times, cruel elements of this rite was the blood sacrifice. When a new Drakkar was ready to be launched, or when an old one was preparing for a particularly dangerous voyage, sacrifices could be made on its keel, hull, or prow, often on the image of a dragon's head or other mythological creature which was supposed to scare away evil spirits. It could be the blood of an animal, a horse, a bull, or a pig, which were specially fattened for this ritual and chosen as the strongest and healthiest, symbolizing power and vital energy. The blood symbolized life and strength, which were transferred to the ship, making it part of the natural world and connecting it with the spirit world, giving it a soul and the will to win. The blood of the victim was believed to calm the sea spirits, drive away evil creatures, prevent misfortunes, and ensure safe sailing, making the ship faster, unsinkable, and more controllable. In rare cases, especially before very important or risky expeditions, human sacrifices may have been made, although direct evidence for this is rare and controversial, and is most often mentioned in Christian sources, which may have exaggerated the cruelty of pagan rituals and demonized them for their own purposes. However, symbolic or real sacrifice, the purpose of which was to appease the gods and infuse the ship with some of its life force, was an integral part of the ritual, providing its magical protection. In addition to the sacrifice, the ritual could include other elements designed to enhance magical protection and favor with the gods. For example, the application of runes of protection and luck on the hull of the ship, on the mast, or on the rudder. Each rune had its own meaning. For example, the Thuris's rune for protection from enemies, the Rido rune for a safe journey, and their combinations were supposed to protect the vessel from storms, enemy attacks, breakdowns, and other misfortunes, as well as attract a favorable wind and luck in trade or battle. The master builders who participated in the creation of the ship could also take part in the ritual, using their knowledge and experience to strengthen the magical connection between the ship and its future crew, pronouncing special spells or prayers over the wood from which the ship was built. Before launching or setting sail, the chieftain or captain of the ship might offer prayers and libations to the gods of the sea, such as Njörður, the god of navigation, wealth and fertility, patron of sailors and fishermen, and Aegir, a sea giant who personified the fury of the sea and its unpredictability, and who had to be appeased. Jewels or other valuable objects might be thrown into the water as gifts to the sea gods to appease them and ensure their favor, gaining their protection during the voyage. In some cases, special songs or spells might be used, which were sung to invoke protection and blessings, creating a special atmosphere and enhancing the magical energy of the ritual designed to connect the ship with the forces of nature. Sometimes the ceremony would be accompanied by a ritual feast and dance on the shore to mark the important occasion, as well as libations in honor of seafaring ancestors. The crew might also swear on their weapons or shields, promising to defend the ship to the last drop of blood. This ritual was extremely important, because the Vikings believed that without proper consecration, the ship would be exposed to dangers and could be wrecked, or its crew would not return home. Their fate would be miserable. It was a way to control the unpredictable elements, an attempt to enlist the support of higher powers and ensure the safety of everyone who boarded, giving them confidence in their own strength. The absence of strangers at this ritual was explained not only by its sacredness, but also by its strategic importance. Knowledge of how the Vikings protected their ships could be used by their enemies to create countermeasures or even to cast curses, weakening their fleets and leaving them vulnerable. It was a deeply personal and protective practice that served to strengthen the crew's morale, ensure their safety and success in sea voyages, which was vital to the survival and prosperity of the entire Viking society, their trade, exploration, and military ventures. It was one of the foundations of their maritime power and their success in expansion, allowing them to become the dominant force on the seas of the north for several centuries, reaching lands unknown to other peoples. And the last was the burial ritual of the chieftain, the last journey to Valhalla. Death for the Vikings was not an end, but a transition, part of a great cycle of life and death that ended in the afterlife. In their minds, the most valiant warriors who died in battle went to Valhalla, Odin's hall after death, where they feasted with the gods and prepared for Ragnarok, the final battle, fighting every day and rising again for a new feast, for endless fights and celebrations. The less valiant could go to Folkvang, Freya's domain, where they served her, or to Helheim, the world of the dead under the goddess Hel, where those who died of old age, illness, or not in battle went, and their afterlife was less heroic, but just as important. Funerals, especially those of chieftains, earls, or outstanding warriors, were among the most significant, solemn, and mystical rituals designed to ensure the deceased a dignified passage into the afterlife and to guarantee him a place among the gods or in the chosen halls, in accordance with his life's deeds and status. This rite was incredibly complex, multi-staged, and filled with deep symbolism, and its details were kept in the strictest confidence from outsiders in order to preserve the sacredness of the moment and protect the memory of the deceased. Outsiders were never allowed into such a ritual, as it revealed not only their beliefs about the afterlife, but also important aspects of their social structure, hierarchy, and the material goods that might be sacrificed with the deceased, which could attract robbers or enemies who knew about the buried wealth and wanted to appropriate it. One of the most famous and spectacular, though very rare types of burial for great chieftains was the ship burial. If the chieftain was a seafarer or a ruler of a coastal region, His final resting place was often on a ship. The very drakkar that had served him faithfully in life, or a specially built vessel that was his most prized possession. The deceased, dressed in his finest clothes and adorned with jewelry, rings, bracelets, brooches of gold and silver that he had worn in life, was laid on a couch inside the ship, often on animal skins symbolizing his status. Everything that he might need in the afterlife and that symbolized his earthly power and wealth was placed next to him. Weapons, swords, axes, shields, spears, bows and arrows, armor, household items, feasting utensils, cups, tools for crafts, personal jewelry, coins, silver, gold, tools, food and drink, honey, ale, meat, bread, so that he would not go hungry on the way. Often his faithful companions were buried with the leader. Favorite horses, dogs, falcons, who it was believed would serve him in the afterlife, accompanying him to Valhalla. In some of the most dramatic and horrific cases, especially at the burial of very powerful and influential rulers, slaves or servants of the chieftain could be sacrificed and buried with them, who voluntarily, or under duress, although voluntariness is often described due to the belief in a better afterlife with the master and the desire to avoid a worse fate, chose to follow their master into the afterlife to serve him there, continuing his earthly existence and maintaining his status. This was the highest expression of loyalty and submission, and a symbol of the absolute power of the chieftain. Once all preparations were complete and the ship was filled with everything it needed for the long journey, it was either set alight and sent out to sea, a rare but impressive sight symbolizing his journey to the gods, or more commonly it was hauled onto dry land, placed on a special burial mound, a mound made of earth, and then set alight, after which it was covered with earth, creating a huge burial mound that served as an eternal monument and landmark. The burning ship carrying the chieftain's soul away in clouds of smoke and flame was a magnificent sight, symbolizing his journey to Valhalla or other realms of the gods, his ascension. This process could last for several days, accompanied by ritual songs, lamentations, loud calls to the gods, a feast in honor of the deceased, sacrifices and stories of the deeds of the deceased, glorifying his life and deeds, so that his name would live on for centuries. In addition to burial on a ship, there were other forms of burial, such as cremation on a pyre, especially if the person died in battle, and his body needed to be quickly cleaned and sent to the gods, and the ashes could be collected in an urn and buried, followed by the construction of a mound over the ashes and bones, or burial in the ground with stone circles, or menhirs symbolizing the ship or sacred place, marking the resting place and protecting it. In any case, the grave or mound may have been filled with items that were considered necessary for travel to the other world and to ensure a comfortable afterlife, reflecting beliefs in the continuation of life after death. This ritual was not only a farewell to the deceased, but also a way to strengthen the bonds between the living and the dead, maintain order in society, and reaffirm belief in the afterlife and the continuation of existence. The details of the rituals were strictly confidential, as they carried sacred knowledge about how to help the soul of the deceased reach its destination in the afterlife and ensure its well-being there, which was important for the entire community. Revealing these secrets to outsiders could be seen as a betrayal of the ancestors and gods, as well as a risk to the magical protection these rituals provided to the family, as they could try to desecrate the grave or summon evil spirits. Viking burial rites were a deeply personal, complex, and sacred tradition that reflected their unique worldview, their beliefs in fate, valor, honor, and the afterlife, and their deep respect for those who had passed on. They believed that proper performance of the rite not only ensured the deceased a worthy place in the afterlife, but also brought blessings to the living, ensuring their protection and prosperity. Funerals were thus not only moments of mourning, but also powerful affirmations of life and faith that connected generations. These 5 rituals, the initiation of young warriors, the wedding, divination, the consecration of the drakkar, and the funeral of the chieftain, are only a small part of the vast and complex world of Viking beliefs. They were deeply personal, tribal, and sacred, which is why they remained hidden from the eyes of outsiders. Each of these rites was filled with symbolism, magic, and deep meaning, helping the Vikings live, fight, and die in harmony with their gods, ancestors, and nature. These rituals shaped their identity, strengthened their community, and gave them the strength to survive in a harsh world filled with dangers. Their secrecy was a way to protect their traditions, their culture, and their beliefs from influence, misunderstanding, or desecration by the outside world, preserving their purity. Although much of their world remains a mystery, studying these rituals gives us a unique insight into one of the most fascinating and influential peoples in human history. They show us that the Vikings were not just warriors, but people with a deep spiritual life, whose faith and rituals were an integral part of their existence and the key to their success. Their legacy lives on in myths, legends, and archaeological finds, continuing to inspire and fascinate us with their mystery and power.